Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so we are back to 2025 ranking series, and to kick it all off we are ranking up 2024 champions because a lot of things change in the game, and I do my ranking lists largely taking in account not only my personal thoughts and opinions but also current game relevance and trends, especially for the most competitive game modes. That does mean that on rare occasions, champions that are objectively kind of better on paper and do more things will be ranked slightly lower than some champions that just do some things the best. Great example here would be like a champion like Spiral, who's objectively like a mid champion, but she just happens to deal with Serpent and she just happens to deal with Dark Phoenix, and that is very, very important for competitive play. Therefore, she is ranked higher than somebody like White Tiger, who's objectively, I think, a better champion with more abilities and is capable of doing more and, cooler and more fun. But in general, these are the champions that we use when losing matters. In the most competitive game modes, by the most competitive and skilled players, these are the champions that they bother to learn, bother to rank up, bother to invest, and end up, using in the game to compete with each other. Because in the competitive game modes, winning is not guaranteed. You're either going to lose or win your Battlegrounds match. In quests, winning is effectively guaranteed eventually, because, either you're going to learn how to do the fight and do it, 15 times over and get good enough, or you're going to revive your way through it, or you're gonna rank up more champions and try and do it with different ones. But the point being is that doesn't happen when losing matters. So again, that is exactly why these rankings are maybe slightly different than some other people would. But again, there is still plenty of personal input, so feel free to discuss any and all placements. I know that every single time I upload these videos, I insult some family's legacy and their forefathers with not loving a specific champion as much as they do, but that is fine. How I see the game, and this is, how I rank the champions with their overall value, in my opinion. That said, this is the old ranking, and it has changed quite significantly, and this is the new one for the less than good half. Now, we're going to be talking about the good half, the good part, the top 12 champions, if you will. And some champions have slid down quite a bit. Number 12 is going to be Negasonic. And in reality, I might actually kind of been tempted to place her a little bit lower because she has all but kind of disappeared. We still use her for Alliance War, and she's still absolutely phenomenal with countering every and all skill defender up until Yelena. She's okay against the Yelena, but not great, I would say. And I never liked her as champion, I'll be honest. I have her at rank 3, and I used her kind of because I had to. Few bits of feedback. She always felt more of a champion that's a ton of abilities thrown together rather than a coherent kit. Number 1. Number 2, she was clearly purpose built to answer every single skill threat up until that point, with significant downgrades being her damage and base stats. Her damage is mid. Okay. Like, unless you're fighting like specifically designated skill targets, have the class advantage, and can, have a very good flow of the fight, the damage is not great. That's 1. And she's quite squishy, so I often take quite a bit of chip damage. And that's the way she is. And she, again, was always going to be the champion that's going to get thrown away as soon as something better comes along. And something better has come along. That something better is effectively Jean Grey. And I think the existence of Jean Grey has basically kind of relegated her out, as well as not like a significantly large amount of skill defenders being very relevant right now. If we had more skill defenders and people were opting to main more mutant attackers, maybe they'd squeeze her in, but she's still capable of answering, again, majority of the skill threats in the game. And she definitely still has her uses, and it's not necessarily a wasted rank up, but She's not it anymore. Her time in the spotlight was fairly short, which is a shame because she could have been so much better. I just feel like Kabam kind of put in too many baked-in negatives in between her damage and fairly bad base stats and health, and that's the end result. Moving up is Spiral, and Spiral is somebody that I mentioned here. I never liked Spiral. I think she's mid at just about everything except like 2 things. She's basically designed to kill Serpent, and she happened to be quite good against Dark Phoenix, and that's about it. She's a fairly mediocre champion at just about everything else, in my opinion. Not like awful, usable. You can still use her for some different fights, but if you rank her, you know exactly why you rank her. If you use her, you know exactly why you use her. If you didn't, you also know exactly why. She is what it is. She's a product of our time, if we will. If this game and this recap this ranking video would have been done like a couple years ago, it would be way, way lower. But Kabam amped up defender strength to like 11 and made defenders where unless you have counter, you auto lose. So you have no other choice to rank up these champions, to learn them, to invest them, and to put them in your decks and use them in alliance wars and whatnot, because you have to, not because you want to. And I think that's a tag on Spiral, effectively a champion because you have to, you know. But Spiral for you, non-optional. But the downfall of Spiral is also the fact that there's just more better Mystics coming out that address the same defenders and more. And that's it. Spiral is, again, one of those champions that, well, as soon as they're going to be enough, and I think we are at that point already, because, you know, drafting, for example, Serpent is becoming a liability in Battlegrounds, because not only champions can, you know, kill Serpent well now, but there's like Nico that in many metas just nukes through him. And then there's the new Mystic Spidey. And Kushala in many metas, you know, does it in like 50 seconds or something. And that's already pushing her away. And, you know, we're going to be another 1-2 Mystic buffs away from, hopefully, her biting the dust completely. Next up, Dazzler, and it pains me to put Dazzler here. It generally does, but I don't think I can place her high. The reason for Dazzler kind of stepping away a bit is, again, it's just a happenstance. She's an amazing champion that can access huge and cool damage, but she doesn't do enough of the new defenders as well as some of the other mutants now do, in addition to the fact that she's basically exclusively an offensive champion, and mutants have almost are equally capable dual threat champions. You know, Onslaught, Jean Grey, and, you know, they do have Sinister, and then they still have champions like Gentle and whatnot that are maybe not as good offensively, but they are defensive threats and they do plenty of things offensively. Still think Dazzler has a place in the game. I think she is still cool. But I think it is quite undeniable that she has been kind of falling on dark times. Hopefully, you know, she can make a comeback. A lot of champions often do, based on, again, which fights and matchups they can do. For instance, like a good example here would be Shocker. All of a sudden, it's significantly more relevant because Shocker can destroy Nico very well. In fact, in the current meta, Shocker is my favorite Nico counter, and in general, I could say that Shocker is, you know, solid counter to her, because you basically don't have to bait out special attacks, or maybe one at most, and that makes the fight more manageable. And because of things like that, champions kind of regain competitive relevance. That is still absolutely fantastic to have. Also, one of the reasons that kind of further pushed down Negasonic, but it's kind of like a dog-eat-dog world out there. So, you know, Dazzler started to push down Negasonic, and she did, absolutely, for, you know, that is effectively what replaced Negasonic for a lot of people. And then Dazzler itself is getting replaced by a handful of other champions. At the same time, absolutely fantastic champion that still can do a lot. And, you know, placing 10th in as competitive pairing or list of the champions is not bad at all. Next up is going to be Enchantress. And then Enchantress initially was, again, a lot higher. Enchantress actually was ranked, Bullseye, Shathra, Dazzler. 6th, I believe. But before that, upon the release, you would place her even higher in like top 4. Because upon the release, she seemed like a nightmare defender. And she still is a defender that embodies a lot of things that I really dislike. The randomness, the reliance on AI, if she doesn't let you intercept, your fight goes awful. If you get unlucky with, missing through her invisibility spell a couple of times, your fight can get awful. And on the flip side, unless there's something enhancing her defensive capability, you can destroy her with just about anybody. And with how this game is moving and, potency of defenders, that's not good enough. Like, if every single champion that's capable of nuking anyone is also capable of nuking Enchantress, you're not that tough of a nut to crack. There's always that, percentage of chance that something's going to go wrong in a fight against Enchantress. But in general, she's a defender that can get nuked down by Thanos and Venom and Hitmonkey and, any high damage champion, plus a ton of, random champions too. The thing that still maintains relevance for Enchantress is that she has effectively transformed from one of the major defensive threats in the game to something that I call a meta merchant. And meta merchants is a category of champions that have plenty of defensive utility that's generally not quite good enough, for competitive play. But under specific conditions, it gets turbocharged. For example, a champion like MCOC. MCOC got buff and he got more annoying on defense. But in reality, you can just parry heavy him and go nuke him. And all of a sudden, majority of champions can destroy MCOC. However, if you can't parry a MCOC, that fight becomes very specialized, where you will need to bait out the heavy attacks and try and punish those with your own heavy attacks. So you need specific type of animations. And it's getting much harder and it's easier to make mistakes on. And in any stun immune meta or meta that heavily punishes parrying, MCOC automatically becomes significantly bigger defensive threat. And the same thing here works with Enchantress, where if there's any type of extra power gain involved, she's way more dangerous. If she, has Energize on her, she's more dangerous. If there's some sort of power gain node, she's more dangerous. So under specific conditions, she still is an insanely dangerous defender. A handful of seasons back, we also had like that meta where Enchantress was virtually unkillable unless you had like 1 or 2 specific counters to her. But basically, unless like a specialized science champion, she was a nightmare to deal with, just because of the defenders getting extra power. And this is where we are with the champion, where in a generic, type of meta, I don't necessarily think she's, worth running or investing heavily. But in specialized metas, she can still transform into an absolute menace. So again, that definitely has value. That has relevance in the game. She's still, again, a present alliance for defender. But other than that, she's not it. She's not that scary anymore. Additionally, offensively, she's abysmally useless. So that doesn't help her case. In super long fights, you can ramp her up. Yeah, but why do it? Like, again, in super long fights, you can ramp up Enchantress and she's going to perform like a normal champion would. And you can, get similar results with any good offensive champion. So, offensively, I don't even want to discuss her. She's just disgustingly bad offensive concept. If anybody ever thought she will have, like, offensive... Right. Anyways, moving on. For number 8 is Dust. Dust's moving slightly upwards in the world, I feel. Because Dust, again, she just kind of keeps proving herself. Again, she's a dual threat champion. Admittedly, not like the most capable attacker, but decent. She has, fairly okay list of matchups that she can do. Especially now with the special 3 skip, it also kind of gave her a little bit of a bump because you can easily go to your level 3 and to your Sandstorm that way. And then you have your level 2 handy, and it just kind of gives her a bit of extra damage and reach with increased storm duration. And obviously she has her defensive use as well. She does interact with some specific metas reasonably well also. Obviously she does have counters, plenty of counters, but one of the cool things about her is that she always has that, she's unforgiving for chip damage because she switches off willpower thing that she has going on for her, as well as, you know, trip immunities. And she's definitely a champion that's hanging in there better than her contemporaries alongside in this list. And I like that. I genuinely like. I really liked Dust when she was released, but she was lagging my phone, so I pretended she doesn't exist and hated her for quite a long time. Then for defensive reasons, for specific matters, I took her to rank 3, and recently she has stopped lagging my phone, so I actually took her to rank 4, and I don't regret it. I actually like her as a champion quite a bit. I do. And this is where I think she stands. She's not the best. She's never going to be the best mutant, but she certainly does have value. One of the most underestimated things about her is whenever the opponent or their block is struck, medium or hits glances inflicted, when the opponent purifies she basically glances everybody on her parries. That is so useful. There you go. Incoming attacks during Dust's well-timed block window have 100% chance to glance. As a defender, this triggers for any incoming basic attack as long as Dust is blocking. But point being is, this is such an underestimated ability, because you can switch off so many nodes and so many abilities with that. I just wanted you guys to know that this is crazy, crazy useful, and one of the reasons why Dust is kind of valued this high. Because again, 100% chance to glance, and it also reduces 100% of opponents' offensive ability accuracy. That means none of their abilities work, and obviously take less damage. So I love that, by the way. Moving on, spot number 7, Count Nefaria. And Count Nefaria, I think, is one of the more well-rounded science champions. In a world with no battlegrounds, Count Nefaria would be more popular than he is. He's extremely good to have. And under specific conditions, like power gaining metas, he can be also a defensive threat. But additionally, he's good. The only issue is, in the meta, the fights that he kind of excels with, the fact that, you know, he can do those fights, he also happens to be like one of the slower options. For example, a good matchup explanation here would be he's actually quite good against Dark Phoenix. Because of his massive energy resistance, because of his ability to regenerate, he does that fight well. Much better than most champions in the game, but he's quite slow doing it. And that is kind of the story of Count Nefaria. The most impressive fights that he does them quite slow. Unless, again, there are specific circumstances like massive regeneration involved, in which case he becomes like an absolute powerhouse. He is effectively more moderate version of the leader, where if health reversal is involved, the leader is absolute best, but an absolute noodle in every which other way. Then Count Nefaria is significantly better than leader in like a standard vanilla situation, and he gets significantly better at like reversing regeneration, for example, matchups, but he's nowhere near as good as leader is. Overall, though, I think he's a well-rounded champion. I think versatility is there. There are some pitfalls to be worried about, such as, you know, the weight prevention and the unfazed mastery do kind of still hit him hard. But overall, he's a champion that will perform reasonably well just about anywhere in the game. And yeah, in certain specific conditions, he's basically immortal. That is also the coolest thing ever. Right, let's moving on. Spot number 6, I'm giving it to Prowler. Prowler, like 2 months ago, would have been ranked lower, like spot number 8 or 9, maybe 10 even. But he's definitely making a comeback. He just is. One of the reasons is Captain Britain. Captain Britain currently is the top 3 defender in the game. She's an absolute defensive menace, and he wrecks through that. Additionally, His list of matchups is still quite impressive. Whether it is due to his medium strikes that are non-contact and cannot be evaded, so you can use him in like evasive matchups as well, like going for a punish quite safely. And he again does Bullseye reasonably well. Then the non-crit obviously does help him quite a lot. And the Rupture for a tech champion is not necessarily the most common thing either. That kind of helps him take a few more matchups. And access to Incinerate and access to Pursuit. All of those are good things. Realistically, I think Prowler is kind of one of those champions similar to Warlock, like that just happens to kind of do the right things. The worst thing about Prowler is the fact that he's, you know, the all or nothing type of champion. And I think he would be way more popular if he wasn't, but his SIG ability scaling is just about the worst in the game. So if you do have a Prowler at like SIG 40, rank 3, or you have a Prowler at SIG 200, rank 3 or 4, you have two completely different champions. But a high SIG Prowler is never to be underestimated. He can be much faster than you think, and he can do more matchups than you think. And Prowler is constantly one of those champions where, for instance, in a match I can think I have my opponent cornered, and opponent has Prowler, and they somehow do that fight very well. And that's about it. I just think, similarly to the next champion on the list, he is at the right place at the right time. His spot on this list is not necessarily guaranteed, pending on the future trends. But currently, it's kind of like what Dazzler was. He's doing the right things at the right time. And when Dazzler was peaking, she pushed out Negasonic, because she did just about everything Negasonic did better. Now, Prowler's doing the things better, you know, than champions who he pushed below. Next up is Jack. Jack is currently one of the most attractive and hottest and needed tech champions. Because, again, Captain Britain matchup, he's one of the best Captain Britain counters in the game. But on top of that, obviously, he can still do a varied mix of different champions quite well due to his like massive level 2 and again the non-crits. So obviously he, you know, destroys onslaughts, and his reverse control immunity is very, very good for Jean Grey, and that is becoming more and more relevant. Again, reverse control immunity can be helpful against Cassandra, so that can be super useful. And he's absolutely and utterly unimpressive champion when you look at him in like a blank type of environment. When you bring him in against like Realm Legends Winter Soldier, he's okay. And you go through his abilities, he's just like okay, but again, he happens to do all the right things. He's, you know, regioning energy damage passives and offsetting the damage from neuroshocks, for instance, but not just neuroshocks. Then he has the immunity to the reverse controls that's becoming increasingly more important. Then he can trigger parry against non-contact hits. That still lets him do some of the more wild matchups. Obviously, it's kind of intended to be against Onslaught. But in reality, again, you can use him reasonably well, for instance, against Zola. And he can be an okay Zola counter because of his specials not relying on hit damage. And again, the Incinerate burst, that's fine. So he's not critting. And yeah, the level 2. The level 2, you know, hitting very hard. And one of the most beautiful things about Jacko'Lantern is that he interacts insanely well with any attack modification. Which again makes him more potent in Alliance War, because when you boost him up significantly, his damage absolutely goes bonkers. Any node that increases special attack damage or gives him some sort of furies, he becomes an absolute monster. And like, just wait for the final meta of this Battleground season. Jack is going to nuke everything like 30 seconds, one level 2. So, again, he's a champion that's very kind of simple and straightforward. Happens to do the right things at the right time. So now, the heavy hitters. Bullseye. Bullseye has lost a bit of a step. There's no way around it. And part of it is just because of how many crazy mutants are out there. Like, mutant class is on the very, very definitive glow up. And that's hurting Jack. And there are like two other reasons why why Bullseye is doing significantly worse than he should. The reason number one is Okoye. Because Okoye just happens to tear him a new one. I'm not entirely sure it was intended. But in reality, in between like Okoye and Starhand Spider-Man being an absolute menace against the guy too, and then Kushala generally being very good against him, and people getting better at fighting him, he's nowhere near as dangerous once he was defensively. But, you know, he still is a defensive threat that is to be respected and is still relevant and present in the game, more so than, for example, Enchantress. So that alone would have placed him slightly higher than Enchantress placement would, because he's still somebody that makes it to the people's rosters, even in a vanilla meta. It's just, again, he can be a defensive draft liability, for example, if you draft him early. The upside, the reason why he's ranked as high is that, unlike Enchantress, for example, he's offensively more capable than people think. And yes, for like competitive Battlegrounds matches in general, he's too slow. But again, because of his guaranteed crits and his bleed damage, whenever there's any sort of attack modification involved, he absolutely wrecks. And there are plenty of metas where he's like one of the better attackers. So that is a fairly significant and important thing. You know, we had the Stunning Reflection, Bleed and Poison node, and Bullseye is great. And then we have, you know, Power Shield nodes, for example, and he can be, you know, wonderful there. And then we have some other nodes that he happens to work extremely well with. And then again, he still has that anytime there's any increase in his power, he becomes drastically better defender, because that is how you deal with Bullseye. Effectively, every time you enter a fight with Bullseye outside of like a couple of champions, your goal is to kill him without giving him as little power as possible. If a node is giving him excess amounts of power, that fight immediately becomes undoable for a ton of champions. And that, again, has value, in my opinion. And Bullseye, additionally, speaking about rest of the game, continuously and periodically proves himself to be one of the best offensive options under like very tricky set of circumstances. Be that Eternity of Pain fights, be that, you know, Alliance War attack somewhere, or be that somewhere else. Offensive Bullseye is much more common and present than many of you think. And I kind of look forward to the next Eternity of Pain iteration, because I'm 100% certain that he's going to shine again, because he has so far just about everywhere. A great example, again, is, you know, Incursions. He goes mental in Incursions, and he just has a ton of interesting interactions that completely transform how good he is. If only he had a slightly better base damage, he would be such an amazing champion. Right, the big top three. The third spot's by Shathra. And Shathra is, I'm going to put her simple, she's one of the most versatile attackers in the game. I do have this champion matchup sheet, where so far on just about every champion that has been input in it, I think Shathra effectively scored the highest. That's it. I think, go and find Shathra. She has the most matchups that she does out of like any champion in the game that we have put in there so far. It doesn't nuke anybody, but out of all the relevant defenders in the game, there are only like 4 that she doesn't do well. And that's entirely why she's up here. She's not the nukiest champion, but the versatility is ridiculous. The fact that Shathra is, you know, a workable option against Captain Britain, for example. The fact that Shathra is a reasonably good option for Yelena. The fact that Shathra is a reasonably good option against Zola. And obviously, all the Cosmics. Again, she might not be the best Dark Phoenix counter, but she does better than just about anything else. You know, that wouldn't be considered a counter. You know, Serpent, obviously that's there. And then, yeah, she just works. She destroys Onslaught. She is good against Jean. It's the versatility of very fragmented but capable energy damage, and her, increased ability to spam special attacks. It kind of makes it work. Again, she is one of the most versatile offensive champions in the game, with a reasonable and respectable damage output. I like her a lot, by the way. And not as a character, but as a champion in the game. So, that Shathra is a champ that makes it work. Don't think I have to hold myself up longer than that. Top 2 has changed as well. Last time around, I ranked up Serpent slightly higher about Thanos, even though I gave a caveat that they're basically interchangeable. I do think that Thanos has a tiny bit. I think Thanos is higher a bit. The reason is for competitive situations, because again, Serpent overall rest of the game's impact, I'd actually lean on Serpent. I think Serpent is better for, like, questing or answering tricky fights or potentially in Necropolis. I think outside of the competitive situations, or specific battleground, Serpent's still the better attacker. He's not going to be the fastest, but he just works ridiculous amount of times. He's genuinely one of the best offensive champions everywhere that is in battlegrounds. In battlegrounds, under specific conditions he can work, but he's generally going to be on the slower side. So keep that in mind. So again, I would fully understand if you guys reverse them. The reason why I changed their placements and positions is that in battlegrounds, on defense, he has become a bit of a liability. He used to be a champion you could see in your first opening draft and draft him, and you knew that even if opponent gets a counter, it's generally going to be 60 seconds, and they might end up taking chip damage, and it's something that you can outspeed. So even if opponent drafted the best counter, or the best counter they had, quite often they either took quite a long time or ended up taking chip damage, and you've kind of felt comfortable with that. That's not really the case anymore, with Kushalas nuking him faster than ever, with Tiger being capable of doing him in like 40-some seconds, and now Nico, especially in some metas, running through him, and now we have the Mystic Spidey. And he has become a champion that you generally want to draft toward the end, especially because he'd also be generally the slower offensive champion if he chose to use human attack. So his kind of hold has lessened. At the same time, I think he's absolutely horrible for the game and the mode of battlegrounds. I absolutely hate that Kabam made a champion like that, because in order to kind of like rein him in, you have to dedicate so much of your roster spots to being able to counter him, which I hate, man. It's the same old feeling when opponent drafts Domino towards the end and you don't have a good Domino counter, and fighting Domino with random champions is miserable because you randomly lose all your health. And Serpent kind of represents the same idea. It's like, unless you have counter, you lose for sure. And I think it's a very bad thing for the game. At the same time, they made him so defensively ridiculous that they made him an insanely good attacker. Bring him in Necropolis, I promise you, if you haven't already tried it, you'll be surprised how insane he is for like Necropolis and longer fights. Same thing is every single story content that's coming out, he's like one of the better offensive champions for a ton of lanes. Every Epoch of Pain or a like type of quest, like we had, he just nukes. We had the Grandmaster's Gauntlet version 2, absolutely slays that. Still, that means simple thing that Deathless Thanos is kind of a bit higher, because obviously Deathless Thanos always was less capable defender than Serpent, but more capable as an attacker, and that's where he still is. Is good, just like Serpent, really everywhere in the game. He's a good battlegrounds defensive placement, who's a good champion draft early on as well, because if opponent drafts a counter, you can just use him on attack. Offensively, he absolutely makes laughing stock of a handful of very capable defenders, like Zola and Solvark absolutely get eaten alive by this guy. And then he fights very well outside of his class field as well. You know, random matchups like, you know, Spider-Woman can get absolutely wrecked by his evade counter, and so on and so forth. So he's offensively insanely impressive and capable, and defensively capable and impressive as well. So that's the revised ranking now. That is what we're looking at right now. So here is a recap of everything else. I recorded this video probably in the previous night as to when I'm going to post it, because I have a very busy day on Saturday. I'm not going to have too much time to work on rank up videos. We'll see how much I can squeeze in. The next one might only be Tuesday. I hope I get these out quicker to you guys. But next up, we're going to have to do 2025 Champions Ranked. Part 1. Let me know what you guys think of the rankings, and I'll catch you guys soon. Bye-bye. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all